All right. So for the divisional round, San Francisco obviously 13-3 got the bye. So for the season, offensively, they finished fourth in total offense at 397.9 a game, 13th in passing yards at 237.0. They were tied 12th in sacks allowed at 36, second in rushing yards at 144.1, tied 8th in yards per carry at 4.6, fifth in third down percentage at 45%, and second in points per game at 29.9. Defensively, also very good. Second in total defense at 281.8 allowed a game, and first in passing yards allowed at 169.2, tied fifth in sacks with 48, 17th in rushing yards allowed at 112.6, but they're tied 22nd for yards per carry allowed at 4.5. They're tied second in third down percentage at 33%, and they're eighth in points per game allowed at 19.4. Their injury report, D Ford is questionable, but he's gonna play, it looks like. Kentavious Street, he's questionable with a knee. That's another defensive lineman, mostly an edge guy, who you have the flexibility to move inside if needed. Minnesota, 16th in total offense at 353.5, 23rd in passing yards at 220.2. They are tied 5th in sacks allowed, allowing only 28 on the year, although that can be at times misleading because it's kind of like feast or famine. You either can't touch Kirk or you're getting 7 sacks. 6th in rushing yards at 133.3. They're tied 11th in yards per carry at 4.5. 9th in third down percentage at 43%, and 8th in points per game at 25.4. Defensively, not as good as they have been in the past. 14th total defense at 341.6, 15th in passing yards allowed at 233.6, tied 5th in sacks with 48. That is tied with the San Francisco 49ers. They are 13th in rushing yards allowed at 108.0, and 18th in yards per carry allowed at 4.3. They're 19th in third down percentage at 40%, which is not that great. Tied 5th in points per game allowed, though, at 18.9. Their injury report, they put Mackenzie Alexander on IR today. With that, they have Nate Meters now on the roster. Jaron Kearse, he's going to be out, it looks like, from a toe and knee injury. Adam Thielen, questionable with an ankle that kind of got, spiked in practice. And my thing with Adam Thielen here is I'm thinking there's no way he's not going to play in the game, at least to start. It's going to be a different question as to whether how effective he is or ineffective because of it, or if he can finish the game, or if he's on a pitch count. All of that is different, but I'm pretty sure he's going to at least begin the game in the game. Just because, it's the playoffs. He's, one of your better players. So you'd think he's at least going to give it a go. Actual thought time. Offensively, which is where we always start here, you may want to opening kickoff again just to kind of set the tone or attempt to set the tone like they did in New Orleans. I am a little concerned about the outside stretch runs due to the athleticism of that defense. I know the numbers kind of say, well, you can run on them on the outside, but they're getting Quan Alexander back. D Ford's coming back. That's a lot of range. Obviously, Tart's coming back too. So they're getting healthy at the right time here, which is not good. Play action, going to be very key to a very reactionary defense that likes to crash down on those. If you watch the Ram game, you see it a lot. Which would help with the pass rush. That would nullify it a little bit. And when you have, 3 or 4 really good ones over there, crucial to slow them down any way possible, and which could involve screening them early. You could potentially move Sheldon Day in the middle. They're missing their nose tackle to an injury, and now he's on IR. So you could move Sheldon Day in the middle potentially with some inside zones and maybe use some more traditional drop back play action passing to kind of get him when you do have the chances to do it. I do think there's a chance you can move Diggs and Thielen away from Richard Sherman, just because he doesn't flip sides, to where you can kind of put Thielen in the slot and get him to avoid Sherman and just put Diggs on. I believe it's going to be Ahkello Witherspoon. It could be a pretty heavy rotation between him and Mosley, because Ahkello Witherspoon did get benched a little bit late in that game. So it could be a heavy rotation between the two. I'm not sure if they're just going to roll with one, but that second corner on the outside that's not named Richard Sherman, probably going to get tested a lot either way. Obviously, they do run a cover 3. That's kind of the base shell of this defense. It's very Seattle-like in that way, and that means you might be able to get them on the outside on some curls, some outs, and comebacks, things of that nature. Sometimes, teams are afraid to throw those because those could result in turnovers, but I feel like you can't win this game without taking some risks, so you need to do that. Another way to beat cover 3 is some of those seams down the sideline, which you might be able to incorporate off of the drop back play action passing. If you can move Sheldon Day on some of those inside zones, that could be something they could take advantage of. Obviously, no turnovers. Pretty key. And you do need to hit the shots when you get the chance, and don't be missing that throw like he did in the Bears game way back when in week 4. And yeah, just hit those when you get the opportunity, because this defense doesn't give you that many opportunities to do that. So when you get that once or twice a game, it's that much more important to hit that big play and that explosive, because that might be your only chance of the day. And defensively, this offense that Minnesota's going to be playing against kind of mirrors what the Vikings do, at least schematically speaking. So obviously, stop the outside stretch run. That is the most important thing, because we know how this offense works. You get those outside stretches going, and then it's kind of over, because all of a sudden they can play action boot you, and they can get mismatches, and they kind of get you flowing one way, use your aggressiveness against you. It's a whole deal, and we know that all that well. So I do think you need 2 guys on George Kittle at all times, because otherwise he's probably just going to eat you alive. He's kind of a yards after catch tight end, which is a type of guy we haven't seen Minnesota play yet. They've done fairly well against tight ends this year. The only one that really strikes me as they kind of got him was Darren Waller, which was another kind of physical freak kind of guy, but a lot of his yards kind of came late in the game that didn't matter anymore. The score was kind of already decided. Juszczyk could be kind of an X factor for this game, I think. Like a guy no one's talking about really prior to the game, and then all of a sudden, great game. Kind of like Taysom Hill did in a way. I know Taysom Hill's probably, he's definitely more high profile these days, but Kyle Juszczyk is very good. He's very versatile. You can play him at tight end. You can play him at H-back. You can play him at halfback. You can play him at fullback. He's very versatile. And that's a guy that I feel could give Minnesota problems, just because you are accounting for George Kittle so much, to where if they're not testing you outside, they could test you with Kyle Juszczyk. And yeah, and the weakness is the interior of that offensive line. They do have some injuries up front there, mainly Weston Richburg, the center. So you might want to get a little creative there, just because you don't have a natural inside pass rusher. I guess Ifadio Denigbo is your inside pass rusher now, but maybe this is a Barr kind of game, potentially. Probably not. Too hopeful, always is, to get Barr involved in pass rushing opportunities. But yeah, that'd be kind of nice. They do need to play aggressive and gain turnovers out of this, just because I feel like you can't win this game without being aggressive and getting turnovers. And play action could potentially be rough, just because of how Minnesota decides to play defense. It's kind of a bracket coverage in the middle. They kind of play it weird, because the slot corners are typically asked to not give up the inside. In this defense, they are pretty much trained to give up the inside just because they end up creating a bracket coverage with either Barr or Kendricks with the slot corner. So that being said, play action could be a little rough because of how much you do rely on the linebackers to cover the middle of the field. You start running 10, 15-yard dig routes in behind a play action. If they can get the run game going, you're kind of screwed, which is why stopping the run is the first thing you do. Obviously, against a team that's second in rushing yards with averaging nearly 145 yards a game. So stop that first so you can make them one-dimensional and force them into a drop-back game where you kind of see us struggle. It's going to be a very similar deal where they kind of have these smaller offensive linemen up front, and if they're in straight dropbacks all the time in passing situations because they're not winning first and second down, all of a sudden they're in a major disadvantage with, Hunter and Griffin and Odenigbo kind of chasing after Garoppolo, and you can maybe get some of the turnovers that way, which in turns means the middle of that defense needs to be stronger against the run. When teams run zones on them, I feel like they do a little better just because they're flowing sideline to sideline, and you do have Griffin and Hunter on the edges, and then you got Kendricks and Barr in behind it who have a lot of speed and range. So I think running outside tends to not work as well in Minnesota, but we'll see how this works because we've seen stranger things happen. I am taking the Niners in this game. I know Minnesota's coming off a big win, but last time they came off an emotional win, didn't really work so well. I am taking the Niners 28-24. I do think this one's a little closer because I think they're very similar in how they want to attack things. I kind of feel like we'll find out pretty quickly how competitive this Viking offense is going to be on pretty much like the first drive because of those outside zones. Because Quan Alexander is coming back, and that's going to be a big factor on that. I know the numbers haven't been great, but getting Quan Alexander back is really going to affect that because of how athletic he is. Can you really get to the edge on that defense? I'm not sure you can. And if you stop the outside zone, you might be in for a long day, given the fact that this is based off a play-action boot kind of offense. And that's why I was saying maybe the inside zones with some of the more traditional just drop-back play-action passing to do it that way might be the better way to go, just because I think you might be able to move Sheldon Day on some inside zones. And the other thing is, I think ultimately those pass rushers are going to be too much for this Vikings line. And if you look back on it more often than not, when a team had more than one pass rusher to really worry about, Minnesota hasn't held up very well. And this team has 3 or 4. You got Eric Armstead, Buckner, Bosa, Ford. You can probably scheme up either Alexander, Dre Greenlaw, or Fred Warner as well to get potentially easy sacks against a line that doesn't always communicate the best. So, yeah. Thinking Buckner's probably the biggest problem here just because he's interior and he's a large human being, and we all know Garrett Bradbury's kind of not a large human being, and that can at times be a big mismatch. But yeah, this game I can kind of see going either way, but I can also see it going really, really poorly for the Viking offense here, to where it goes under, some of the other ones that we've seen in the past have playoff losses if it ends up being that. I hope it's not. I would like to be wrong, obviously, but I just can't not take the Niners. It just feels like one of those things where it's like they're the 1 seed for a reason. They're very, very good. And I think they've kind of earned the benefit of the doubt of playing a 6 seed despite the 6 seed having good momentum. To me, it's like, it just feels that way. I would like to know your comments down below. Liking and subscribing always helps. And until next time, I bid y'all adieu.